Disclaimer: nurture's role in human development is undeniable, but let's begin with a necessary clarification. Denying the role of nurture in human development is not the goal here. It's overwhelmingly clear from decades of scientific research that environmental factors significantly shape behavior, attitudes, and mental health. The role of parents, education, culture, and life experiences cannot be ignored in shaping the individual. However, in the ongoing nature versus nurture debate, it's crucial to understand that a system focused solely on one aspect, whether nature or nurture, will eventually collapse under its flaws. A precise historical example of this failure is the ideology of Nazism or the principles of Social Darwinism. Both philosophies are fixated purely on biological determinism, ignoring the undeniable environmental impact, leading to some of the most disastrous consequences in human history. Now we see liberalism facing a similarly precarious fate, as it's rooted in the erroneous idea of tabula rasa, the notion that humans are born as blank slates, entirely shaped by their surroundings. While this concept was revolutionary when first proposed, it has since been discredited by scientific advancements. Liberalism is a system of thought wholly built on the premise that nurture is everything. At the same time, nature is nothing, and it will falter like philosophies that lean too far into biological determinism. Freud versus Locke, defunct but not useless. To understand how defunct ideologies can still impact modern society, let's compare Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis with John Locke's liberal philosophy. Both have been foundational in shaping fields of thought, Freud with psychology and Locke with political philosophy. But both have also become relics in their pure forms. Freud's psychoanalysis, for instance, has largely been discredited as a comprehensive treatment for mental health issues. Still, key concepts from his work, such as defense mechanisms like repression and denial, remain relevant in modern therapeutic practices. While Freudian psychoanalysis cannot cure conditions like autism or Down syndrome, it can help individuals cope with their unique challenges. Similarly, elements of Locke's liberalism still hold relevance. Concepts like individual rights and the pursuit of happiness have shaped democratic societies. Still, the belief that humans are born as blank slates, purely molded by their environments, has been scientifically disproven. Just as psychoanalysis fails to treat certain mental illnesses, so too does liberalism falter when applied to the governance of entire societies. The consequences of running a nation based on a defunct idea like tabula rasa are much broader and more damaging than the limitations of psychoanalysis. When policies are built on false assumptions about human nature, entire social and economic systems can become dysfunctional, leading to instability and decline. The psychopath problem, when liberalism's blind spots create disaster. One of the most glaring issues with liberalism's tabula rasa-based thinking is that it fails to account for the existence of individuals who fundamentally do not act for the greater good, specifically psychopaths. Liberal theory often assumes that individuals, given the right environment and opportunities, will act in ways that benefit society. But what happens when those in power are incapable of empathy or altruism? A psychopath doesn't behave according to the same social contract that liberalism assumes governs human behavior. Systems can be exploited to catastrophic ends when such individuals gain influence, especially in leadership positions. A real-world example of this flaw can be found in the economic philosophies of neoliberalism, which claim that those with the most money are best suited to guide a nation's economy. This line of thought ignores that wealth accumulation doesn't necessarily equate to moral or effective leadership. Consider Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the infamous Colombian drug lord. He was undeniably successful in amassing wealth, but his criminal empire wreaked havoc on the country's economy, driving out legitimate industries and embedding corruption within the government. Colombia would have collapsed even further into dysfunction if the government had gotten out of the way of this successful businessman, as some neoliberal thinkers would advocate. allowing psychopaths or morally compromised individuals to steer the ship under the belief that all are equally shaped by nurture can lead to systemic collapse. A similar situation is playing out in the United States with the medical-industrial complex. The government allowed large corporations to design a healthcare system to maximize profit rather than ensure public well-being. The result? Skyrocketing healthcare costs, inaccessible treatments, and a system where profit outweighs the public good. This is another clear example of how an unchecked belief in tabula rasa, that corporations, given enough freedom, will act in ways that benefit society, fails when real human nature, particularly selfish or psychopathic tendencies, is ignored. Harm reduction. When liberalism fails to understand addiction, liberalism's flawed view of human nature is also evident in its approach to drug policies, particularly harm reduction strategies. The core idea behind harm reduction is to reduce the negative consequences of drug use without criminalizing the user. This sounds compassionate and rational on paper, but its failure stems from liberalism's belief in individual autonomy and willpower, concepts tied to tabula rasa. In cities like San Francisco, harm reduction strategies have had the opposite effect of what was intended, with drug-related deaths skyrocketing despite policies aimed at reducing harm. One of the biggest problems with harm reduction is the liberal assumption that drug addicts make rational choices. According to Tabula Rasa, each individual possesses the same capacity for willpower and decision-making. However, we know that this is false. Many drugs, particularly methamphetamines, can destroy a person's impulse control and cognitive abilities. Moreover, prenatal drug exposure can affect a child's brain development, reducing their ability to make rational choices later in life. Simply put, a person in the throes of addiction doesn't have the same autonomy or capacity for choice as a healthy individual. Treating addiction as if it were a matter of personal responsibility ignores the deeper biological and psychological factors at play. To truly address the drug epidemic, addiction needs to be seen as a highly contagious social illness, where individuals suffering from it must be separated from broader society, much like we would quarantine someone with an infectious disease. Continuing to treat addiction as a matter of individual choice not only perpetuates harm, but also reveals the deep flaws in liberalism's view of human nature. People with an addiction don't choose to become addicts. They fall into addiction due to a combination of biological vulnerabilities and environmental availability. Liberalism's failure to recognize this has led to policies that exacerbate the very problems they aim to solve. Liberalism's broader failures: a decline in living standards. The failures of liberalism extend far beyond drug policies and healthcare systems. The core issue is that tabula rasa as a philosophical foundation is false, and any ideology that builds its policies around this discredited idea is bound to falter. In liberal societies, personal wealth and living standards are steadily declining. Economic inequality is widening, housing is becoming increasingly unaffordable, and job security is eroding. This is happening because liberalism has created systems that assume individuals are endlessly malleable and that the right policies or market incentives can solve all social problems. But as we've discussed, not all individuals are created with the same capabilities, motivations, or willpower. Psychopaths, people with a substance use disorder, and the deeply entrenched disparities in individual capacities reveal the gaping holes in the liberal worldview. Until liberal societies recognize that tabula rasa is a false notion and begin to incorporate a more nuanced understanding of human nature, including both nature and nurture, they will continue to spiral into dysfunction and decline. In conclusion, the collapse of liberalism is not simply due to a failure of governance or policy, but rather to a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. As long as liberalism clings to tabula rasa as its guiding principle, it will remain a defunct ideology, unable to cope with the complex realities of the human condition. Just as Freud's psychoanalysis has been rendered obsolete by advances in psychology, so too must liberalism be rethought in light of modern science, or it will continue to fail the very societies it claims to uplift.